Well, everybody, you get a second podcast this week. This is hello. I'm Chris Vanini, your host, and I'm joined this time by Austin Smith to talk mostly about Miles Bridges. Surprising news made official today, Thursday. We're recording this just right after he officially announced that he's coming back. I didn't expect to be having this conversation. I didn't expect to be doing a second podcast this week. But Austin, how are you doing right now?
I mean, phenomenal. I can't even put it into words. You know, I thought for the longest time, we talked about it at length that I always said I hope I have to run the tape back, but I thought I was pretty, keeping that little hope alive that he's just a different kid and maybe legacy really meant something to him. And seems as though we were right. So obviously we'll get into it, but man, what an exciting day.
And for those who maybe didn't listen, we recorded a podcast earlier this week with Jeremy to talk about the new MSU hockey coach, Stanton Cole. Good detailed conversation about that and about MSU hockey. This podcast will mostly be about basketball, but we're actually going to open up real briefly, talk about, before the Bridges news came out, some more football news off field that's not good for anybody. But another MSU football player is under investigation for an alleged criminal sexual assault. This is unrelated to the other three players suspended for something in, I think it was January. This apparently happened on April 9th, which we don't know any details. We don't know anything could possibly be. Don't know how it will affect anything, but the only thing I guess I would say is, you hope MSU handles this the way they should, but it continues to just be a complete lack of, leadership, accountability for what's going on in the football program right now. We don't know what happened, but for this allegation to come out in the middle of everything that else is going on is just kind of unbelievable. Don't really have much to say other than that, other than we'll see where it goes. But I wanted to touch on that briefly to open up because it's more important and more serious than anything else that was going on. We'll see what happens with this and what happens with the football program because, man, there are just a lot of bad things happening in that program right now. Austin, did you have anything you wanted to say on that?
Not much, just beyond echoing kind of your sentiments about just the fact that this can happen again, despite all that else that's going on around the program and, this investigation that's been looming for quite some time now. The fact that someone, if it is all true, again, we don't know anything at this point, but that there's a member of this football team that would do something this stupid and wrong, it's just really disappointing, and again speaks to some deeper issues with the program at the moment, and hopefully they can get taken care of. And if this person is found guilty of whatever they are charged with, that it's all handled appropriately.
Yep, kind of the same thoughts we had when the initial stuff came out. We'll have to see what happens with that. No timetable on any of this stuff, but just it's not good. So that's where the football program is at. Moving into the news that the reason probably, the reason that MSU fans got excited today.
The good stuff.
Miles Bridges announced he's going to return. It came out yesterday, I think, either Tuesday or Wednesday, yes. From Adrian Wojnarowski from Yahoo Sports reported that Bridges had canceled his visits with agents and was heavily leaning toward coming back, despite former MSU players and Izzo and agents and everybody telling him to go pro. So, Austin, what was your first reaction when the news kind of hit?
As much as I had kind of felt like I was probably on the positive side of this. I know you and I, again, had talked about it before, but I always felt there was this sliver of hope that there was that Miles Bridges is just simply not wired like other one and dones. And so I guess I had always thought that this was a possibility. in some crazy world. But at the same point in time, when it became official, I was more surprised than I expected to be. I mean, it's shocking. This, Miles Bridges would have been a top. I mean, you had him projected before. You saw him projected before any workouts, before any interviews, and knowing the kid he is and the athlete he is, he would have knocked both of those out of the park. You still saw him in the late part of the lottery. You got to think that there was a chance that his draft stock, I'm sure there's others that would have as well, but his draft stock would only have gone up had he declared. But the fact that he's foregoing that, coming back, it presents an incredible opportunity for this program and this team and for him personally. And it's exciting. It's cool to see, I think more than anything else, that, listen, say what you want about turning down millions of dollars. It's absolutely true. And he's taking a major risk by doing it, but it's cool to see that, legacy, and that a program, and that a fan base, and a university can still mean something to a kid as supremely talented as Miles Bridges. Just in this day and age, there's so many one and dones, and you don't blame the kids. I never blame a kid for going and getting his money. Do your thing. The fact they even have to go to school in the first place for a year is kind of suspect to begin with, but it's cool to see this clearly means more to him than just paying his dues for a year. So, it's a combination of feelings, but all in all, I'm as a fan, I'm just ecstatic.
Yeah, I think we kind of talked about during the year or toward the end of the year when this came up, is that I always got the sense that he was very Gary Harris like in terms of he understood how to work with Izzo. Like a lot of freshmen don't. A lot of it can't take the screaming, and all everything that he does with that, the regimented system that he runs. But Gary Harris always knew how to handle it from day one. Bridges, you always got the sense that he could handle it. He was very mature and understanding of how things worked. And so, when we talked about it, I said, if there's a reason he comes back, it's going to be because, he likes it. And clearly that was the case. I didn't expect him to come back. I know this is kind of a loaded draft and everything, but it comes from Flint, and I just figured a lot of factors would have leaned in toward him leaving, and Izzo seemed to believe the same thing based on the comments that Izzo made. So for him to turn all of that to come back, I think says a lot about how he feels about the program and Izzo and his teammates and everything that comes with that. And you just hope he doesn't get hurt and doesn't lose that potential money that he can make. I'm sure he'll have an insurance policy, but
they already said he's taking one out as we speak, basically.
So
it's interesting. It's funny because it's almost like throwing it back 10 years or so, where he has clear. A while ago, I think a one and done like Miles, that yes, he's incredible. Yes, he's probably a top 10, 15 pick, even though it's a loaded draft. There are clear improvements he can make to his game. And I think even 10 years ago, you would have looked at his name here and been like, you know what, it wouldn't be a shocker if he came back. But now in this age where it's basically transactions for a year almost, where you don't even.
Well, I think part of that. Well, I think part of that is because you used to have guys who could go straight from high school.
Yeah, no,
So now,
you're absolutely right about that. But it's shocking to have him come back. I think anybody, I claim that I thought it was more likely than others, but I'm still sitting here absolutely shocked. I am ecstatic for him. I think there are a couple things. Really, it's kind of funny. This was the perfect storm of a team keeping around a player like Miles Bridges. You mentioned the Flint thing. That's a huge connection. The fact that he loved playing with his teammates is a huge factor. The fact that if he came back, he knew he could play his NBA position is a major factor. And frankly, the fact that they didn't have a great year probably played a pretty big role. I think if that team makes a surprise run to the Final Four, maybe, that's getting greedy, but say they win another game, they make even just the Sweet 16, they beat Kansas, he probably goes. Because at that point, you've got, something to hang your hat on, and legacy matters to him, and that would be a decent, it's not an amazing, it's not the legacy that he could now create, but that's something. That's a Sweet 16. That's you being the best player, on that team. I wouldn't have blamed him for going at all. I still wouldn't. But it all came together just so perfectly for Michigan State, and it's cool to know also that this is his decision. Like you said, Izzo basically told him to go. If you listen to the interview that he did with Andy Katz, he's like, there's almost too much on the line here for him to stay. Yep. His mom was vocal about it. And so all these conspiracy theorists saying, you're going to get your haters every single time, but people saying, oh, the bag man dropped off a nice present for Miles. Izzo's begging his players to stay, all of that. It's all BS. This is all Miles Bridges. Listen to him all season. Watch how he delivers, the statements that he made all year. He loves his program. He loves his teammates, and he wants to be a part of something special. So it's cool to see that can win out after, with all the things that go on in college sports.
So let's talk about what this means now. Before we get I guess we'll do expectations first. MSU probably is going to be a top 5 team next year preseason. They could be preseason number 1. Bridges will be a favorite for player of the year. Before we get into the specific lineups and different ways to work him and everything, from a general standpoint, top 5 preseason team, that probably sound about right to you?
Yeah. It's actually funny. Just before we jumped on here, I saw somebody moved him all the way up to number 3 behind Kentucky, who has a loaded class coming in, even though they're losing so many kids. It's just another Kentucky team. And then Arizona, who brought back a huge player of their own in Alonzo Trier. And got DeAndre Ayton from next year's class, a number 3 Rivals kid in that class. So Arizona's going to be loaded. I mean, it's not like Michigan State is a cut above literally everyone else, but I think top 3 to 5, especially considering how they could round out the recruiting class. It sounds about right to me.
And you're right. And the other factor is that we talked about when we were forecasting for next year, I said, a core 3 of Winston, Langford, and Ward, it's a pretty solid core to build around for another year, 2, 3 years. And then you add guys around it because you got a point guard, you got a guy who can shoot, and you got a big man. Now you're adding an NBA player back into that mix, and you're adding a McDonald's High School All-American in Jaren Jackson. In terms of lineups and rotations here, what are you, I guess, most interested to see how it works? I mean, you figure Bridges is probably going to play the 3 now with Jaren Jackson at the 4, Ward at the 5, and Winston at the point, and Langford at the
2 probably.
2, and Tony Garcia made a great point. That starting lineup is the same last names as that shirt that Bridges wore. The 4 of them is just a different Jackson. And it's notable that this Miles Bridges news came on the same day that Josh Jackson pled not guilty to vandalizing a car.
It's a coincidence.
So what do you think about that starting lineup?
Oh, I mean, that is an incredible starting lineup. I think that's one of the reasons you got to put Michigan State up there with anybody. You can poke holes in the depth. This is not an invincible team they're bringing back, but that starting 5, I mean, that's 3 5-star recruits and 2 high 4-stars that are, and one of them's Nick Ward and one of them's Cassius Winston. I mean, in terms of what that lineup brings to the floor, we'll start with defensively. Defensively, 2 through, the backcourt, I have my questions about. Honestly, that's probably the biggest question mark, is how can Winston and Langford progress defensively.
It's so weird how we're going to go from last year to 0 front court depth to this year. MSU will have overloaded front court depth and now questions in the backcourt.
Right.
So about that backcourt.
Yep. It's defensively is where it scares me. The good news is that, and this is kind of the good news for the entire team, is that with Bridges coming back, this focus, I mean, the bullseye just got real big. But Bridges isn't coming to mess around. He's going to be the leader. He's putting himself in position to be the man on this team, like he was a year ago. But now he's a sophomore. Now he's a national. Now he's an All-American. Now he's National Player of the Year candidate. You know, this dude is now a bona fide superstar who is going to make sure he didn't come back to mess around. He came back to win a national championship. End of story. Whether you like the expectations or not, that's what he just put on this team. And part of that is guys progressing. And the biggest area for progression is going to be Langford and Winston defensively. If they get carved up by point guards, yes, in that front court, you're going to have Ward and Jackson and Bridges and Schilling, all guys who can defend the paint, who can block a ton of shots. That's what's really exciting about it. They're going to block a crazy amount of shots as a team.
Yeah.
And
for being a short guy,
glass.
for being a short guy, Ward was pretty good at
Ward and Bridges just
blocks.
average more blocks per game. They each average like 2 blocks a game.
Yeah, I'm gonna see what they're.
I think the 2013 year.
Yeah, Ward.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Don't mean to keep it on. Yeah, Ward was number 51 nationally in block percentage, and Bridges was also in the top 200. And then you're adding tall Jackson and everything. And
Jackson,
guys, I mean, Bridges will be playing the 3 now too, and not the 4.
Exactly. Bridges is Jackson is all arms, and if you watch his tape from any of these, actually they're playing the Jordan Brand game here pretty soon. He blocks a lot of shots from the weak side. So you've got length and shot blocking for days. You should go from having to struggle to get 1 rebound a game to dominating the glass. And that's all well and good. And that's really nice to have behind those guards.
Yeah, exactly.
So yes, they got him there, but they still got to take a step forward. Whereas if you flip to the other side of the coin, and we're just talking starting lineup here, if you flip to offensively, there should be nothing this team can't do, really. But between you, I mean, if you look at it, and this is all assuming progression, which I think is fair. You're talking about a maestro in Cassius Winston, which always makes Izzo offenses work better. You're talking about a shooting guard who really came on and shot, I think, close to 40% from 3 last year. And Josh Langford showed a beautiful little 1-dribble pull-up game. Small forward to the other wing, you've got Miles Bridges. At the 4, you're talking the number 6 overall rated player in the country in Jaren Jackson, who has albeit a low stroke, but he's 7 feet tall. So a low 3-point stroke, but he's got a beautiful stroke, an evolving post game. And then you've got Nick Ward, who's a consummate post scorer. I mean, it is as complete a starting 5 in every regard as you really could ask for. And then, you get into the bench and you're talking about, like you said, that front court depth, Gavin Schilling. I actually think, depending on how
Kenny Goins will no longer be relied upon.
Kenny Goins won't play. He won't play, and I think I don't know.
He'll play,
but he'll go back to his role.
Right, exactly. He won't have to play 20 minutes a game.
He'll go back to his role as minute stealer here and there,
which he was really good at in that role.
Really good. He was a plus player 2 years ago, absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, you're talking about Xavier Tillman, 4-star forward from Grand Rapids Christian, who just led his team to the state championship game. Realistically, he could redshirt now. It would not be outrageous to see him redshirt. I think they'll probably go all in and they'll play him and they're clearly going for it this year. But I mean, think about the position that they just put themselves in, where I think they'll play him because I think they'll want their starting 4 next year beyond in 18-19 to have experience. But that type of front court depth. You talk about Matt McQuaid, you talk about Tum Tum Nairn, Kyle Ahrens. I mean, those guys go back to roles that they fit. They just fit. This team has such a glut of talent that it fits. There are holes, but man, in terms of starting points for a season, this is about as good of one as you could script up.
Yeah, defensively, MSU was actually still top 40 defensively last year. Not horrible.
That's crazy.
They were still okay on D, and that was, again, starting basically 4 freshmen. So you got to imagine there's going to be a simple jump up just based on experience and knowing what to do another year in the system and knowing how important it is to his own, especially a guy like Langford who was benched at times for that.
Right.
You got to expect an increase there. And you will still have Nairn to be your, I guess Izzo will probably try to use him as your defensive stopper in the backcourt. How effective it will be, I don't know, but he'll still have that. But they won't have the athleticism that they did a year ago in the backcourt. But offensively, last year, the 2016 team was by far Izzo's best offensive team since in the KenPom era, meaning back to 2002. So you take out the Cleaves era guys. And that MSU team was obviously led by Valentine, who led the country in Player of the Year. His assist rate was 45.8, second in the country. Last year, or this past year, Cassius Winston's assist rate, 46.7, also number 2 in the country. So you already have that playmaker who was, again, he did that as a freshman. Now he's got to greatly cut down on the turnovers, but something that Valentine did throughout his career was the assists went way up and the turnovers went way down every year. And so another year you have to imagine those numbers. I guess it's going to be hard for the assist rate to really get that much better. But but if he cuts down on the turnovers, you've got a really, really good guard there. Nick Ward, second in the country in drawing fouls. And now he can be a little bit – he doesn't have to be so careful because, man, when he was in foul trouble last year, MSU was just holding on for dear life every time, just trying to hold out what they could. Now he can – if he gets in foul trouble, you've got so many bodies who can fill that spot. And obviously Ward to Schilling is going to be quite a drop-off. But it's not the same drop-off as Nick Ward to Matt Van Dyke. I mean, that was what I was saying at the end of the year. Like, some Michigan fans got on me saying, oh, you think Schilling's this great player. No, I don't. But he's better than nothing, which is basically what they had in terms of a big man. They didn't have anybody else.
All you got to do is lay it out. Would you rather have a 6'9", 245 pounds of pure muscle playing defense and getting rebounds, or would you rather have a 6'5", 220 held together by shoestring and gum playing center? I mean, it's just the physical. I mean, the body alone, it will make, and just the sheer size of it, you're raising the floor on this team so substantially.
They just needed replacement level big man, and they didn't even have that, and now they do. And now they got that and then some. So now it'll allow Ward to do so much more, not have to worry so much about getting a foul and getting stuck. He can stay aggressive while also, working on everything that he does. I think Miles Bridges got all the attention, but man, Nick Ward had a hell of a year.
Oh, Nick Ward might have been the most important player on the team.
Yeah, I still can't believe he wasn't on the Big Ten All-Freshman team.
That's a joke. That's such a joke. That is unbelievable.
I don't know what his NBA ceiling is because of his physical limitations, but man, he is going to be one hell of a college player. He's got the footwork, he's got the hands, the anticipation. He has all the intangibles, the touch around the rim, all the things you can't teach. He's got that, and him and Bridges developed quite a rapport with each other at the end of the year. Bridges dishing off to Ward. Miles Bridges was getting a lot of assists by passing it off to Ward, and it was a very I think Gary Harris and Adrian Payne kind of had a connection like that a few years back, and that's what it kind of reminded me of what those two guys were having. So it'll be interesting to see how that moves forward. You talked about Jackson, and then you got the guys off the bench. McQuaid got more confidence as the year went on. You want him to get back to kind of being a shooter. And the guy I talked about a couple of podcasts ago, who I think could quietly have a pretty good year just based on the lack of backcourt depth, will be Kyle Ahrens. So someone asked me on Twitter the other day if Ahrens would redshirt. I don't think so because they need backcourt bodies kind of. And I think Ahrens can kind of move into an Austin Thornton type role. I mean, he's 6'5", 215, kind of a similar build to Thornton.
Better athlete.
I'm not saying that because they're both white guys who shoot. But and there's also the better athlete. He was part of the dunk competition in high school. And I think you saw a lot of confidence from him in the limited minutes he got at the end of the year. Toward the end of the stretch, he was shooting almost, I think, 40% on threes by the end of the year, he'd come in and hit 1-2 a game, and I think he could be a guy, another solid minute stealer for you there.
Yep.
So yeah, that 2016 offense was the best by far of the Izzo era when you had Valentine and Costello, Forbes. I do think this next year's team could push on that, and you got to imagine with the guards back, they're going to cut down, and everybody a year older, they're going to cut down greatly on the turnovers, because this was a pretty good offense when they didn't turn it over. They were top 40 in effective field goal shooting. The problem was they were just terrible at the free throw line and terrible turning the ball over. So you cut those things down a little bit. You had the experience. This could be, like you said, a very, very, very good offensive team.
Yeah, it's just crazy. And one of the things that has to make you, if you're a fan, so excited is that the problems from last year, if you look at the real problem spots, the turnovers, the general youth, and the lack of size, that all goes away. All of theoretically, assuming that, it should definitely be cut down when it comes to the playing like freshmen, because they're not freshmen anymore. When it comes to the turnovers, because like you said, they've got another year of experience under their belt. I'd be shocked if it stays the same way. And then the lack of size, I really, really, and it's not some crazy take, but that is going to make this team, and I was saying this even if Bridges was gone, just strictly the uptick in size and what that should mean on the glass will make this team so much better than a year ago. Izzo teams live on the glass. And now when you sub out, like we were just saying, you sub out Ward, you sub out Jaren Jackson, instead of bringing in Goins and Van Dyke, you're bringing in 6'8", 270-pound Xavier Tillman and 6'9", 245-pound Gavin Schilling. And then if everybody gets in foul trouble, you can bring in Goins. You can shift Bridges down to the 4 and bring in Arns at the 3. I mean, like there are so many options with this team. I think one of the challenges, if you want to talk about challenges, is going to be Izzo settling into his rotation, because we know he likes those deep rotations. He loves to play everybody.
It should be easier now that he actually has bodies at all the spots.
Yeah, 100%. And I totally agree with that. And, listen, there's not going to be many bad choices he can make, frankly, with this entire roster out there with what he's bringing back. But it will be interesting to see how he mixes and matches. That front court is going to be very interesting. I don't know. I mean, it's really early, but I have to think that Jaren Jackson would end up starting. I mean, he is, not that this affects Izzo's decision-making whatsoever, he is the highest-ranked recruit he's gotten, at least per Rivals, since Shannon Brown. He finished higher, number 6. It's higher than Bridges. It's higher than Langford. It's way higher than Gary Harris or Payne or Dawson or any of those other 5-stars. And he just fits this group. When you think of Nick Ward and Bridges, I think he's the best fit just because of his shooting ability. Whereas if you put Schilling in there with Ward, it kind of clogs up that lane a little bit, because neither of them are jump shooters per se. And I don't think that there's a 2 or a 3 that's going to be able to slide in that is better than starting Jaren Jackson at the 4. So again, lots of mixing and matching that Izzo's going to be able to do. But I think that's probably how you see the season. I think Schilling's probably your first big off the bench. But again, long ways to go. Yeah,
so that's from a personnel standpoint, there is an abundance of riches that Izzo will have this year. I think he's got to be fired up about that. I think what he had to do with the front court this year just kind of ate him alive in terms of not being able to do what he wanted to do and put guys in all of their best spots. So it'll be he'll have the ability to do
It'll be fun. They won't lose many rebounding battles. I bet you they're up top 5 in the entire country in rebounding next year.
And that's coming off a year where this was, I think, the worst. This was, I believe, the worst rebounding Izzo team of the Izzo era.
Yeah,
it was right up there.
I'd be surprised if it wasn't.
I'm pretty sure it was at least the worst offensive rebounding team. They were number 183. I went through it a few weeks ago, I believe. Overall, this is their worst rebounding team, and that's where everything starts with Izzo teams. You got to win on the guys, and you got to win on defense, and when you can't, you kind of are limited in what you can do.
Yep.
So that takes us to wrap up mostly, I think. or not wrap up. Expectations. We mentioned top 5 team. Is this Final Four or bust? Is this national championship or bust? What would you compare? I mean, what would you compare this to in terms of previous MSU teams that have had this high of expectations?
I mean, I think you don't need to go back that far. I compare it to 2013 when Gary Harris and Adrian Payne came back.
Beat Kentucky and went to number 1
Yep.
a week into the season.
I think this is a very similar situation. You don't see a ton of holes in the team. I do think they could use another combo guard, another person who can handle the ball outside of just Tum Tum and Cassius, because and Mark Smith, Mr. Basketball in Illinois, came up for an official visit, I believe, last weekend. Allegedly is taking one to Ohio State.
That's what I was going to wrap up with how the Bridges move will affect recruiting.
Yeah. So I think that plays a role. But sitting here today, looking at the roster as is, yeah, I mean, I expect them to win the Big Ten. I don't think that's that much of a question. The conference, I know some things need to shake out, but see who's going to end up where. But I think they're the best, clearly the best team in the Big Ten. I think, yeah, this is looking like at least a Final Four or bust. I think a lot of people will say national championship or bust. I don't think Miles Bridges came back to bow out in the first weekend again. So, yeah, I think the expectations are going to be sky high, and deservedly so.
The way I've kind of look at those things sometimes, I never say national championship or bust because, because you need some breaks to go your way. You need a little bit of luck, and it's hard to ever predict that. So they make a Final Four and some unlucky happens, like the Gordon Hayward foul on Draymond Green, like stuff like you need breaks to go your way, and all the way. I mean, the 2016 team, I have said that I think that was Izzo's second best team, but they didn't have those expectations going into the year. That kind of happened as the year went on. So in terms of preseason expectations, yeah, I think it's probably that 2013-2014 team, which again had a couple players turn down the NBA and choose to come back in Payne and Harris, and it ended up one game short of the Final Four, losing to UConn. And while we're recording this, actually, Ducking Delvon made a good point. He said next year, he said this coming year is feeling very 2009-ish. And if you think about it, that was sophomore Chris Allen, sophomore Darrell Summers, sophomore Kalen Lucas, guys who had pretty good freshman years after kind of fighting above head for their freshman year. You mix that with I guess that team had that team had veterans in Suton and Marquise Gray and those type of guys that this next year's team doesn't. I think Nairn will be the only senior.
No, Schilling's a senior.
Because he missed this year. So Schilling and Nairn will be your only senior. So we'll still have to kind of see how that leadership develops. But, yeah, I guess it is kind of comparable to 2009 in terms of some of that makeup. So I think it's going to be Final Four or bust. If you don't make the Final Four next year, it's going to be looked at as a disappointment. I would say that's honestly the way it is for most MSU teams. I mean, I know obviously this year you weren't expecting them to get to a Final Four, but you see a team like 2015 that does get to the Final Four, and with everything Izzo's done, the standard is basically the Final Four. So even if you weren't that good and you didn't make it, it's still looked at as kind of a
down year
and kind of an ass season. And so Final Four bust is how I would.
I think that's fair. I think it's fair. I mean, there's no reason to think this isn't one of the 4 best teams in the country. And like you said, a lot of things got to go your way. It's a long season.
Izzo is so – I've heard him talk about it all the time. He is so driven to get that 3rd national championship for the program, because there are only a handful of programs that have 3.
Yep.
There's – I'm going to pull it up right here. The only ones who have more than 2 are UCLA with 11, Kentucky 8, North Carolina 6, Duke 5, Indiana 5, Connecticut 4, Kansas 3, Louisville 3. That's it. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams have at least 3 titles. MSU is in the group right below, which includes Cincinnati, Florida, NC State, Oklahoma State, San Francisco, and Villanova. And it means so much to Izzo to move up. He always wants the program's prestige to always get closer to those UCLA, Kentucky, North Carolina, Duke teams. And a third national championship would put them right in that conversation. A second title for Izzo would put him another notch closer to some of those most legendary coaches. And, 2014 was his best chance in quite a long time. I think they probably had a better chance than 2009 just because of, again, what that North Carolina team had. But
yeah, no kidding.
That 2014 had the talent to do it, ran into not a buzzsaw, but just an incredibly hot UConn team that ended up winning the title that year. 2016, again, I think that was his second best team, had everything in place to win it, and Middle Tennessee plays the game of their lives and gets one of the biggest upsets you've ever seen. So this will be now, for the third time in 5 years, Izzo's got probably a national championship caliber team.
Yep.
And so he's trying to knock on that door, and this will be as good a chance as any again to get it.
This is as good as any. I mean, again, I think we wanted to touch on other things that could still happen, so that might be a good transition here. But it's all there. It's all there. No one could deny that.
And yeah, so with Bridges coming back, how does this affect the state of recruiting? Because MSU's still waiting for a couple guys now. So now they have one spot open?
2. They still have 2.
Still have 2? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they have 2.
Yeah, what's the latest on the
well, there's a couple. I mean, there's really 3 big names right now, that 2 of which have been attached to Michigan State for the longest time, and then one that's a new one on the scene, but whose stock has gone just through the roof. When it comes to the 2 older ones, you're talking Brian Bowen and Brandon McCoy. I think Brian Bowen is probably headed to a smaller school now. The rumor was that he was waiting to see what Miles Bridges and Alonzo Trier did, because he wants to go somewhere and he wants to be the guy. That is,
and he tweeted after Bridges, after the reports that Bridges was coming back. Right. He put a bunch of emojis with
right.
eyebrows.
I think he's just couldn't believe it. But he's been holding out to see where he can go and have a huge impact. Now, I think his choices of the schools he's considering, and there can always be other guys getting into the mix. I know Ohio State's throwing their hat in the ring with a bunch of these guys. I wouldn't be shocked if Kentucky called him, even Oregon, with all the people they're going to lose. So his options might open up. But in terms of suitors that have been around for a while, you're talking DePaul and Creighton. I think right now most people would peg him for Creighton, just based on the fact they've been recruiting him for quite some time. And he has the chance to step in there and kind of be the guy right away. Unless he has a change of heart and realizes oh man, Michigan State's loaded, I can go in and be a role player, but still have a chance to win a national championship. Maybe he decides he wants to come to East Lansing, but I wouldn't bank on that one. Brandon McCoy, I've heard, is leaning out west. He's from Chicago, but moved out to San Diego. And I know Oregon, UNLV are hot on his tail right now. Again, that's another one that wouldn't surprise me if some of the other big dogs came chasing, depending on where other recruits end up. That's another one that's probably the one that matters the least for Michigan State. They're so loaded in the front court. I mean, obviously you don't kick a gift horse in the mouth. You take Brandon McCoy if he doesn't want to be a Spartan, for sure. But I would imagine he's probably headed elsewhere. But the biggest one, and at this point, positionally too, the most key one is Mark Smith. I know I mentioned him earlier. He shot all the way up from somewhere in the 80s in the Rivals Top 150 to number 52. He's been getting offers left and right. I think he's going to Ohio State this weekend for an official visit.
Are those cops coming after you?
Yeah, can you hear that? That's right outside my window. I just moved downtown, so there's a lot of those. But yeah, he's going to have a lot of options. I know he kind of turned down Kentucky, who did offer him as well.
Kentucky just got. Well, I guess Kentucky lost it.
They got Jamar Baker. so that kind of filled their spot there. I think he's probably the best bet for Michigan State, and as a combo guard, I mean, he would play a sizable role. I would think as sort of the third main ball handler in those pressure type of situations. He would probably be asked to be more of a point guard than a shooting guard at first. So, I think he's probably the best bet. I still wouldn't rule out a grad transfer. Not sure who it would be. But yeah, that's sort of where it stands. I think Smith not only is the best bet, would be the best fit. And the other two, listen, you love hearing Michigan State's name in with these 5 stars, but with Bridges coming back, it's like landing them both almost at this point, just because you know what he is, you know what he's done, you know what he can be. So yeah, no matter what happens, I think everything else from here on out is sort of icing on top of the cake, or the cherry on top of the icing on top of the cake.
Yeah. So you think of the guys who MSU's in the mix for, you think Smith should be the top priority because of mostly positionally?
Yeah, I would say yes. I think that's accurate. I think Bowen would be second, and it's not a big difference between the two. But I think Smith, not only are you getting positionally a better fit for this team, but you're also getting a guy who's not going to try to leave after a year. You're probably getting a 2 or 3 year player at least, a guy who would help shore up that backcourt in the future as well, and eventually be a starter. Whereas I think Bowen, from what I read, he's trying to go somewhere to be the man and leave. And I don't think Michigan State, if that's really what he wants to do, I don't think at this point that's a great fit for him. If he changes his mind, then by all means, come on down. But I kind of think if that's his prerogative, Creighton's probably a really good fit for him.
Yeah. So that'll probably be the last we talk hoops here on the podcast for a little bit. I don't know if we'll do another podcast for any recruits, because we kind of broken down where things are at. I'll make sure you guys are always checking out the onlycolors.com for good written stuff on all that and what everything means. Next podcast, I don't know. Maybe if something happens with football, I don't know. But Austin, thanks for jumping on and doing this quick podcast. Thanks, guys, for listening. And you finally got some good news for MSU to talk about. Actually, 2 podcasts in a row if you want to count the hockey changes one as well. So, a lot happening. Thanks, guys, for listening. Make sure to check out the site and all that, and social media and everything that's on that. So, for Austin, this is Chris. Thanks for listening, and we will see you.